Hello, everyone. It's Debbie, and I'm going to go through part of my project I've been working hard on oh my gosh, since KetoCon, after listening to Dr. Mindy Pelz and Cynthia Thurlow and Dr. Anna Kabeka, all people that have become friends from podcasting over the last few years, and then Benazotti and Dr. Pompa, all this information we hear about fasting and low carb, keto, it is applied to those, like the other 90% of the people that are not healthy. What if you are an athlete, endurance athlete training for sports, and you're exercising a lot? Those guidelines are going to be a little bit different. And my mission is to help you figure that out. So I'm going to do a presentation for fueling and training the low carb athlete. And then I'm going to today do the female athlete because I think it's so fascinating what Dr. Stacy Sims said a few years ago about matching the hormones with exercise. But what about nutrition, low carb, carb cycling, keto, carnivore? What type of food should you eat? And there's so much more to it because it's so individualized. We need to personalize this information you're hearing on podcasts and social media and blogs and research, because even the research I'm not a big fan of, because it's often on select age group and mostly on men, and it's really hard to say that's a one size fits all. So everything's kind of a template, and we take that information and apply it to our own life, our own lifestyle, schedule, sleep, stress, activity. Everything that I talk about in the 8 elements of the holistic method need to be applied. So focus areas of this, probably 3-part webinar. So I time it's just try to keep this 30 minutes. But why we need to take care of ourselves, female athletes, why they're different than men, talk about fasting. For athletes, female athletes is different than a male athlete. Talk about stuff I've learned from Dr. Dan Plews and their Endure IQ program, and talk about some menu plans and how we can put this together for the endurance athlete. And this is what I'm doing coaching clients. I'm helping them make sense of their nutrition and exercise training schedule, and then looking at the lifestyle habits, because we can't out exercise poor lifestyle habits. We can't out supplement poor lifestyle habits. We can't out exercise poor nutrition habits. So the holistic method is 8 elements, and we need to look at that. So the intermittent fasting, real quick, Dr. Sean Wells, he should be a doctor. He's got so much education behind him and so brilliant. But his Instagram is the Ingredientologist, and he is super amazing and actually does a lot of this just out of his own passion, because he's a formulator for supplements and does research there, but he does all this other stuff for fun because he wants to help you be a better version of yourself. So the female athlete, let's see if I can move my little camera here. There's a trend we've done for years. I've done a lot of that, and I think a lot of what my health issues became since 2013, I haven't been able to race, is back in 2005. I started before then doing heart rate training. 2001, I started doing Ironmans, and I was doing heart rate training back then. I worked with Mark Allen and did the Maffetone math method back in 2003, started metabolic efficiency testing in 2005, and then starting to get into the zone diet. And then I started to be curious about lower carbohydrates for endurance sports when I met with Bob Seebohor in the USA Triathlon Certification course, and then started dabbling in not eating before I worked out. That was not a good experience. I share all this information in my book called Life is Not a Race, It is a Journey. And you can learn all about me in that book. But let's go back to this slide on YouTube. You'll have to watch this video if you want to read everything, and also go to my website debbiepotts.net, because I put all this, thanks to my assistant, into a beautiful ebook that you can read, because this is 200 slides, so there's a lot of info. That's why it's a 3-part series. So females on intermittent fasting, women tend to be more sensitive to alterations in meal timing and energy restriction. Women's bodies tend to hold on to fat stores when they perceive that energy is scarce. Starting weight, overall energy balance, and number of consecutive restricted days all play in the role of affecting or effects of fasting. It's not intermittent fasting for women that's difficult. It's the body's perception of insufficient energy available. Note that because we'll talk about the kisspeptin hormone and talk about cortisol and all the stuff that happened to me. Makes a little more sense after I dive deep into these hormones and keeping them balanced. Our body perceives stress, threat, and puts everything on hold because it helps us survive. Our body's innate intelligence is pretty dang brilliant. Premenopausal women may be more sensitive to fasting than postmenopausal women while intermittent fasting. It's not a one size fits all approach. So I love Sean. Well, so again, I said everything, my purpose, my why, my story. I've shared a lot of it in my book, though I wrote that book in 2015. And I'm finally, 2022, sharing my story, speaking at conferences, especially the last 2 years because of the pandemic. I wasn't able to follow my mission, but after I closed my fitness studio, my main stress in October 2019, I was able to focus on this. And then COVID was part of the blessing in disguise to make me to get out and speak about this. But now it gives me that focus on doing this for my business, coaching people to avoid going through what I went through. So again, all this and more is on my website. Look under the free resources. I make all my presentations into ebooks. So there's tons of information and stuff that I have been doing. I share on Instagram and the Low Carb Athlete on Instagram, and it's connected to Facebook, the Low Carb Athlete. And we also have Keto for Endurance Facebook group page with Stephanie Holbrook and I helping manage that group. And it's pretty great group, 2,000 people so far. Love to have you in there. Okay. Hormones for females: estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, cortisol, oxytocin, and growth hormone. I'm not going to talk about all this episode. This podcast webinar is going to skip through this, but I just want to go over this chart from Dr. Mindy, because this just nails it, what happened to me. Keys to balancing your hormones. When you don't have enough oxytocin, that's that feel good, the cuddles, the holding hands, hugging, sex, all that human connection improves our oxytocin. But when we do not have enough of oxytocin hormone, stress goes up, cortisol levels go up. So oxytocin and cortisol are in opposition. When one's up, one's down. So if we want to lower cortisol, because you're too stressed out, go hug someone, relax, chill out, and hold or play with your dog. Now, when your blood sugar goes up, often that is, remember, cortisol, I say this all the time, is a blood sugar response, an emergency. Our body needs to respond to that saber-toothed tiger going to attack us and tear us apart. We need to run for our life. So cortisol increases blood sugar levels. Now, what happens if we're chronically stressed? We're always raising our blood sugar. What happens if your blood sugar is all the way up all the time? High. Now, this happened to me. Take note. If stress is raising your blood sugar, it has nothing to do sometimes with what you are eating. I was low carb athlete, an endurance athlete, training 20 hours a week and teaching classes and doing the low carb stuff when I got adrenal fatigue in 2013. My hormones were all off balance when I was, I think, 42 years old. So cortisol goes up, your blood sugar goes up. If the blood sugar is always raised, insulin is higher. And if insulin's always higher, we become insulin resistant. And I had this happen to me. I did not change my exercise or my nutrition. When I suddenly gained 30 pounds in March 2013, I was extremely exhausted. I had no energy to exercise. My workout would be a nap in the afternoon. Now, high levels of cortisol, Dr. Mindy says, and insulin start to accelerate the decline of your sex hormones, leaving you with insomnia, hair loss, anxiety, hot flashes, brain fog, weight loss resistance, low sex drive, and muscle loss. I for sure had the weight loss resistance. I gained 30 pounds without doing anything with my exercise and nutrition. I was lean and strong, finishing off Ironman Hawaii, and had an amazing race season 2012, 2013. It was the worst year of my life so far. Now, in my health and fitness. So this is huge to listen and look at this screen: oxytocin, cortisol, insulin, the connection, and how Dr. Mindy's solution is fasting. Now, I don't agree with that for the female athlete. If we are already so stressed out, that fasting window we'll get to needs to be 12 hours to maybe 15 hours. And I've done training with a Ben Greenfield, and he says female athletes 12 to 15. And 12 hours should be intuitive or unintentional fasting if you eat the right foods and the right timing, stopping 3 hours before bed. So sex hormones are impacted from estrogen or from this imbalance, causing estrogen, progesterone, testosterone to be out of whack. And fasting is one of her solutions that she'll talk about in her new book. Dr. Minnie Pelz has a new book coming out this December called Fasting Like a Girl. So the female athlete and hormones, the differences in females versus men. I won't get into estrogen, roles of estrogen. This will all be in the ebook you can go to. I talked to Keto Mojo, talked to NutriSense, I talked to Aura. I didn't really talk to them. I read their blog and started to dive into all this. One of my certifications is a FDN practitioner and nutritional therapy practitioner. I looked at our information there. So all this is in here. I want to pause here before I skip to fasting. Support your adrenals. No one tells you this. I learned this years ago in nutritional therapy. And Dr. Mindy's saying this, and I'm excited because she has such a ginormous following that she can make an impact. Progesterone is made primarily in the ovaries of cycling women. It's also made by the adrenal glands of both men and women. In menopause, adrenal glands become the primary source of progesterone for women. After estrogen peaks around days 12 to 14, the menstrual cycle stimulates ovulation, then progesterone should rise and be at its peak days 19 to 17. Now, after you go through menopause, this doesn't happen and your ovaries start to retire, but guess who takes over the job for the ovaries? Your adrenals. And it's not talked about enough. So I really want to start supporting your adrenals now. I would do a Dutch test and get your labs tested, a full thyroid panel. I have all that on my website, or reach out to me and learn more. I do this for clients and investigate the whole picture and put a program together for them. So the Goldilocks effect for everything, you don't want any of these hormones too high, too low. So we want to look at why we need these hormones, but what's low, what's high, symptoms, and all that. So bear with me if you're watching the screen. I'm going to skip all the way down. We're going to go into nutrition another time, but going into the female athlete, how to fuel, train, and perform your best as an aging female athlete. Now there's apps called Flow, or there's some other ones. I know people call Clue is one. I use Flow myself. You want to start tracking your cycle. Now I put this just in my calendar. I've been marking my cycle in the Aura Ring app, Training Peaks. I've been working on creating a 4-week cycle map for my athletes, female athletes on Training Peaks, so they can track everything now and go over what we're talking about today. So as you know, probably already, we have cycle, we have hormone changes, and our food cravings change. So we have the follicular phase is basically the first half of your cycle. And then there's the luteal phase. So we have ovulation in the middle. So our estrogen peaks, comes back down after ovulation, then progesterone starts to rise, progesterone, and then estrogen. So I broke this up based on Dan Plu's Endure IQ program I did. There's some information from him. I also pulled out Dr. Stacy Sims' book, Roar, and my notes from her blogs and her book, and tried to put this together for you. There's some information on the Flow Tracker app, what happens on day 1, and premenopausal women. We'll talk about that too. So let's dive into the differences in the phases. So let me stop here. So research findings in the follicular phase, Endure IQ team that Dan Plews runs, endurance performance is better in the follicular phase and into ovulation. Research studies have shown that hand grip seems to be a typical strength test. Hand grip maximal contraction strength was higher in follicular phase, and there was an increase in sprint performance in late follicular phase, ovulation, and early luteal phase. Ovulation, hand grip performance was at its highest in ovulation phase. Luteal phase, they had cardiovascular intensity was a little higher. Not so much higher, but the perceived exertion of working at the same intensity in your luteal phase, the end of your cycle, will be harder. So say you're beginning of your cycle, you're working at say 140 heart rate, your heart rate at that same pace will be higher in the luteal phase. So you have to work harder at the same given heart rate. You'll have reduction in maximal endurance in the mid luteal phase, and HIIT performance didn't have research studies on, but strength didn't really change. So you can keep lifting your weights and maybe a little bit more around ovulation, because we'll go over that testosterone's higher then, so you can do heavier lifting. But follicular phase, the energy is decreased in the early follicular phase. 1 week before your cycle ends, easy exercise. That's the end of your cycle. So I'm going to skip over to Dr. Mindy's info. Dr. Mindy says day 1 to 10, that's when your estrogen's higher. So this is fasting like a girl, what she went over at KetoCon. This is when you can do more endurance training, more keto, more fasting. She talked about this in a recent podcast. I think it was January 2020. We did an amazing podcast with Dr. Mindy. Day 11 to 15 is ovulation. That's when you can do more strength training, as we might have more testosterone. You want to keep your fasting to up to only 15 hours, so 12 to 15 hours during ovulation. Add more vegetables at this time to support your gut and hormones. So you want to help the estrogen foods there. We'll talk about another session. And then she talks about the 3 Ps: polyphenols, probiotics, and prebiotic fibers create good gut support. And you want to avoid anything stressful on the liver during ovulation, because the liver breaks down extra estrogen. So that breaks down the estrogen. So we want to avoid drinking a lot of alcohol, extra medications, things like that, that will stress the liver, any extra toxins that will overload the liver detox pathway. So we want to save the liver health and make sure it's working so we can have good estrogen breakdown, estrogen metabolism. So days 16 to 19, we can do more keto. So more keto days 1 to 10 and 16 to 19. That's about it. Then same food plan is good. So more of a ketogenic diet, more cardio is okay these days. So after ovulation, this is making sure your bowel movements are consistent. So you have drainage pathways are working. Just before we do a detox program, we want to make sure we're pooping every day, at least once. It's amazing how many people are constipated. So that's one of the things I talk about with my clients. It sounds like an awful topic, but it's needed because it tells a lot. Your poop tells a lot about how your digestion is in detox. All right, progesterone, days 19 to 28. That's when progesterone is building. So we want to eat more progesterone building foods that we'll get to in the nutrition section here. And that days 19, 28, that's when we don't want fasting. We don't want to do any detox. We don't want to do chronic, anything that's going to add to our load of stress, like extra sauna, excess cold therapy. You just want to take it easy that week. So that's for my athletes. I would say that 4th week of your cycle is when you do your deload week. So build, deload with a little break around ovulation. Okay, follicular phase, I tried to break this up. Power phase is what Dr. Mindy's calling it. And you have those days broken up, like early follicular is day 1 to 5, mid follicular is 6 to 8, late follicular. So you can see the changes in here, and I made a chart. What changes you'll see, what food plan. Dr. Mindy says more keto, biotic, feeding your gut, keeping kind of that good healthy fats to feed our hormones, and good animal source protein when you can, and good greens to help the gut health. Menu Pause is a book that I love from my friend, Dr. Anna Kabeka, and she has great menu plans in there. You can choose their 7 days. So what I was trying to do is break up and ask Dr. Anna, all right, you have these amazing different recipes, 7-day food plans. Why don't we match them to the menstrual cycle? And so Dr. Anna said, all right, Menu Pause would be good during the follicular phase. She has a Keto Green Extreme plan that's AIP approved that you could put in here. And the Keto Green plant-based detox diet would be good in this first part of the cycle. And the carbohydrate pause, do more of a carnivore. So those are 4 of her menu plans in her new book called Menu Pause, Dr. Anna Quebeca. Now let's go to fasting. This is not for athletes. This is if you're not exercising a lot. Dr. Minnie says fasting, intermittent fasting, 13 hours, days 1 to 4 when your cycle begins. Day 5, you can go a little bit longer, up to 15 hours. Days 6 to 10, intermittent fasting, 17 hours is where they find the best cell autophagy. So you have to kind of map out your cycle and then map in those days when you're doing a little bit longer fast. And then match that with your training. If you're training for a race or an event, we want to match our training that will be lighter on those days that you're doing fasting. Like a prolonged fast is 17 hours. And you have to make sure you're only fasting if your stress is low. So doing a longer fast that Dr. Mindy does a lot with her cycle or her, what's her group called? Oh, fasting circle. I forget her business name, but Dr. Mindy Pelz has fasting 13 to 17 hours you could fit in during this time if it's right for you. And I don't think that's right for athletes if you're training, it'd be off season. So exercise during early follicular. I broke this down what Dr. Stacy Sims says, who is against doing keto, carnivore. Well, she's all for protein, but she's not a fan of lowering your carbs too much. So again, it's N equals 1. I think you have to adjust. I think a lot of women are going too low of carbohydrates, and I think I went too low. So low hormone phase is the first part of your cycle, day 1 up to ovulation. And this is when you want to hit the gym, work on strength and power. Your estrogen and progesterone at their lowest during this time, so you'll be able to do higher intensity. And then we're able to lift 10% heavier weight around the day before ovulation because testosterone's at its highest. I think that's why. Following additional strength and power program 3 times a week and doing interval training is best suited for this phase. So think day 1 to 14, adding in HIIT training twice a week or some speed work twice a week with recovery in between, and then lifting 3 days. So you can write out your workout schedule, adding that lifting. Because a lot of endurance athletes do not add enough lifting. And I go to the gym 4 days a week and I lift 30 minutes and sometimes 45 minutes with mobility training. And I think you need to look at that, especially aging athlete. Remember, cardio breaks down muscle. It's catabolic, and stress breaks down muscle. It's catabolic. So we want more anabolic. But that's why we'll talk another time about Dr. Gabrielle Leon eating more protein. And Stacy Sims is about that too. You want to get 30, 40 grams of protein in each meal. And Dr. Gabrielle Leon is a fan of her protocol is whatever your goal lean body mass or whatever goal body weight is, hit that in protein. So if you want to weigh 130 pounds, you need 130 pounds of protein a day, broken up 30 to 50 grams spread out throughout the day. So, which is hard because I find when I eat more fat and protein, I'm not very hungry and I have to get it other ways, like essential amino acids from Kion. I'd have to do bone broth in the wintertime. I don't feel like it in the summer. And then I try to make a shake and add 2 scoops of protein in there and have that once, maybe twice a day. But anyway, so back to the screen, we got mid follicular and late follicular. So the training might change. So this is from Dr. Dan Plews and IQ research. They break it down into 3, the follicular phase into 3 parts: early, mid, and late. So you can watch the video to see all of this information, but high intensity. And what's interesting, their research at IQ, best time for fasted exercise for a female is late follicular phase, but limited to 2 to 3 times a week. So days 6 to 8 is the only time of the month that you should do fasted training. Now, fasted training, I must say, is 0 calories beforehand. I put creamer, Laird's creamer, and get some mushroom adaptogens in my coffee. And I don't have my whole coffee before I work out. I just have like a quarter of it usually, but that is calories. So technically I'm not 100% fasting. So Dr. Stacy Sims says on the follicular phase that low hormone phase, high intensity workouts were more primed to access carbohydrates, and that increasing carb intake to promote recovery and maximize glycogen stores is her opinion. And performance tips, she says, about taking advantage of your hormones and doing some sprints of 20 seconds. I thought was a fun idea. If you have heavier bleeding and cramping, the last thing you think about is moving, but you could do 20-second sprints, couple 2-3 times, and see if that feels better to break out the inflammation. Ovulation phase is next. So Dr. Stacy Sims says around ovulation, your training is high intensity, heavy resistance training. You might feel flat around ovulation, then bulletproof the next day. So she has great tip of listening to your body, but take advantage of when you're feeling bulletproof and really focus on strength training. Now she's more of a, she used to do Ironmans, triathlons, and cycling, but I know she's a CrossFitter. So she's, I think, focused on what we should be doing more is heavy lifting and Olympic lifting and CrossFit type of workouts, not so much the endurance stuff, which is not great for us. And then core temperatures at lowest point here, mid follicular. So estrogen surges, you can help get into deep, more restorative sleep when your core temperature is at its lowest. Now I use Aura Ring and I can track my sleep and my body temperature and heart rate variability with that. So it's kind of interesting to match my Aura Ring scores to my cycle, which I will share my chart with you. I'll share how I'll do that. If you do a podcast review, I'm going to give people the female chart that I made. Ovulation phases, Dr. Mindy calls this a manifestation. So manifest during this time what you want. So days 9 to 13 is late follicular, and then we get ovulation time. That could be like day 14, day 15, day 20. I think it varies as we get older. Estrogen's at its peak, testosterone is elevated, and estrogen and testosterone, we want to take advantage of that. I got to edit some of this. See it duplicated there. So breakdown of the hormones requires healthy liver and our estrobolome. All right, food plan. Dr. Mindy has great suggestions of building those hormones with food. So estrogen building foods are flax seeds, sesame seeds, fermented soybeans, garlic, dried apricots, dates, and prunes, peaches, berries, and foods as broccoli, cauliflower, and Brussels sprouts. Now, I am sensitive to sugar. That's why I am more of a keto carnivore person, because I get headaches from sugar because I have issues. So, for me, I would do more broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and flax seeds I can throw in my shake. Sesame seeds I can put on my ground beef is really good. That bagel everything seasoning, add that. And then Dr. Anna's book, this is where she says be good carb up menu plan. So you can add in those higher carbs for days 11 to 15. And then the fasting is during ovulation limited to 13 hours, she says here, but 12 to 15 hours. So ovulation with Endure program, what type of exercise do athletes want to do? So strength, power, focus, because remember those estrogen, testosterone is higher. Strength specific you can do for triathlon sports like over gear cycling, hill repeats, swim paddles, VO2 max workouts, speed intervals. And then lifestyle tips is, I added this in, but liver support using the rebounder, castor oil packs on your liver, great. A catch push protocol, that quicksilver cells that I'll have clients do. Gut support, hydrogen water. Estrogen prefers insulin to be lower. So working on not having too much carbohydrates. Stress too, we're finding. So ovulation tips on the apps, and then we go into luteal phase. How do we want to exercise, or what this is about? Flow app describes what happens in your luteal phase and some clues of luteal phase: increased appetite. You might have more fatigue. You're tired. You have acne, oil, hair, skin. You might feel that second half luteal phase. So towards before your cycle begins, more PMS symptoms. So our hormones are higher in this phase, unless you're like me, that they're low all the time. You don't have high hormones. They're kind of high, low, high. You're quicker to fatigue in the luteal phase. Improved performance occurs, high plasma volume. Hydration is essential. Progesterone raises your core body temperature, so you might be hotter. Vasodilation is altered, so influences ability to cool down in training and racing during that luteal phase. So being aware of your heat adaptation and fluid intake, you'll have to alter your fluid plan if you're racing on your menstrual cycle days 20, 28, or even like 25 to beginning of your cycle. So Dr. Mindy has her plan. I broke her info out by the power phase. She calls it early luteal phase day 15 to 20. So after ovulation, you start to go into the luteal phase. This is where she calls it more ketobiotic, like you did the beginning of your cycle. Her keto green extreme is what Dr. Anna would have you use from her book. And then the fasting style is about 15 hours, but if you want to do a 13 to 72-hour fast without your exercise days going on there, you take those off. That might be appropriate if that's the right fast for you. I don't think fasting more than 16 hours has a place when we're training a lot. So save your longer fast when you're not exercising, but light intensity. Ideal exercise on the days 15 to 20, high intensity, low volume work, anaerobic based workouts, peak strength and powers here, gear cycling, hill repeats, paddles we talked about before, speed, lifestyle tips. We want to take care of stress. So minimize cortisol spikes, increase glucose, focus on slow and low key. Adding a little more carbs will help the glucose, make it more your self-care week. So last little bit here, exercise during luteal phase. Dr. Stacy Sims, she says lifting heavy and expressing power becomes more challenging because recovery is more difficult, I think, and fatigue is higher. So you might want to just change your workout a little bit. She says hypertrophy type template to maintain neuromuscular adaptations, which means developing strong lean muscle program, doing higher reps, less intensity, doing 10 to 15 reps versus your heavier lifting days. Earlier cycle, we were talking about 5 to 8 reps. So that it's kind of that build week for lifting weights is 5 to 8 reps. And then you hit the last week of your cycle, then you're going to the 10 to 15 reps, a little easier, not so strenuous. So days 17 to 21, going into that luteal phase a little more, that's when we want to avoid what Dr. Mindy talks about here, avoid stress and focus on building that progesterone. So 17 to 21, it's really where we want to not do fasting more than 15 hours, avoid ketosis, avoid longer fasts, avoid carb restricted diets, so no keto, avoid strenuous exercise, running a marathon or pushing yourself in a hard workout, avoid anything stressful. So days 17 to 21, this is really important because I think I missed this part in my training for years. And I was racing 2001 to 2012, 2013 when I had to be forced out of the racing world. But I think this is an important part for the female athletes. If you're competitive and training hard, to take this week easier. And then if you're doing low carb keto, you can do carnivore. Carnivore is good because that helps the grass-fed meat. Dr. Minnie said great for progesterone building food, but don't do fasted workouts. Don't do any hard workouts that week. Don't go more than 15 hours fasting. Focus on more stress release, like yoga, meditation, breath work. And then Dr. Anna's menu plans, you can do her carb up or hormone feasting, low carb, high fat, sweet spot, and then do your program. All right, so Dr. Stacy Sims, her focus on the exercise, the early luteal phase, more steady state, aerobic workouts, moderate training, talk about getting your 30 grams of protein per meal and post exercise. You want that 30 grams of protein. So I think that's an important part. We all agree on getting that protein. The carb intake, everyone kind of varies on, but it depends on the athlete. Okay, so I'll skip through this last part of the luteal phase. Dr. Stacy Sims has, that slides out of order, but if you have PMS symptoms, this is a good tip. Magnesium, zinc, omega-3 fatty acids, aspirin, she suggests, or white willow bark. It's a great little trick. And progesterone building foods, we want to eat that last part of our cycle. And that would be pumpkins, squashes, tropical citrus fruits, nuts and seeds, seed oils, pumpkin seed oils, grass-fed meat, beans if they're properly prepared, soaked and sprouted, and potatoes. And late luteal phase. So we want to just take care of ourselves. Main thing, 75% reduction in your exercise. maintain normal structure of training from planned training cycle, deload week, your low intensity week, more restorative stuff, as I said. So that's a big part of the cycle. And this is from Endure IQ. Dr. Sim's PMS cocktail I mentioned. And then we'll stop here and talk about what to do to get fat adapted. And I'm trying to map it all out. So if you'd like to learn more about this cycle here, just let me know. If you leave me a review on the podcast, iTunes review would be awesome because it's needed to show up anywhere these days. It's all different than 10 years ago when I started. People just found you and listen, now it's a competition. So I need to send this to you, this mapping it out cycle chart I've created if you write a review on the podcast. So that's it for now. If you want more information, stay tuned for part 2 and 3, and we'll go into it a little bit deeper. But that's it. And I hope this helped you a little bit. The ebook will be out in September 2020. So enjoy reading and learning and try to experiment mapping out your cycle, your workout schedule, your nutrition, and fasted workouts.